Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we're going to be going over the top 10 decks in the Journey Together format. We've already had 4 major tournaments across the globe, and there's going to be 4 more. So we're in that midway point. We've started to see some ironed out deck lists and start to see more of a better picture of what those top archetypes are, are the main sort of counters, and overall how the metagame is shaping up. We have a fantastic new tool from labs.limitlesstcg.com. A lot of the data that I've taken has been from that. So if you go to the metagame tab, you can actually apply all the tournaments that you want to look at specifically, and then that gives you a great picture of all sorts of things. You get to see the day one percentages, you get to see the conversion rates. These are combining over multiple tournaments, and you can also drill into each individual deck and look at the matchups as well, and that's how I've got the matchup data. One thing to note for all of the decks sort of matchup data is that it does include ties, so you naturally skew downwards on every one of these graphics because it's taking into not just the chance of a win or a loss, it's also the potential of a tie as well, and that overall declines the win rate because, you know, now there are 2 other outcomes, the loss and the tie, in there as well. And it's also worth noting that I'm taking it specifically from each page, and because of those ties, the calculation doesn't always align. So there might be a situation where it looks like a very favourable matchup for one deck, but only an unfavourable matchup for another deck. We're never going to see something that looks very unfavoured, then suddenly becomes a really favoured matchup for one or the other, but there might be situations where the math doesn't quite align, and it means they jump from one box to another with my own little graphics there, just because I have to set a cutoff percentage-wise to fit them into my sort of traffic lighting system. But with that said, let's get into deck number 10, and that is going to be Archaludon. It's accumulated the most points with a poison build of Archaludon with 120, and only 37 accumulated with the Zoroark Archaludon. And also you're going to be able to see the average conversion of 14.50 for getting from day 1 to day 2 with the archetype. And I think really anytime you're getting sort of around that 20%, you're looking at a monster deck. That's a fantastic conversion that you can expect. And if you're sort of below a 10%, that's when it's pretty awful. So I think Archaludon overall has done pretty okay. I think you can see the main reasons why it's not a more popular deck and why it sees a little bit less success overall is because it has those 2 very unfavourables, which are some of the most high profile in the straight Dragapult and the Gardevoir, and it's also picked up in popularity that Joltik Box, which is also an awkward matchup. I think in a different metagame, this would be a really favourable choice because it's very good against some of the Noctowl decks, the Terra Box and the Flareon, where the hit points is just really awkward, and these decks also rely on top-up cards from Pheasantipity throughout the entire game, and Archaludon is very good at avoiding those additional draws that they can gain, so they really are sort of light on resources throughout the entire time. So Archaludon may not be the best positioned right now, but maybe something to look at going forward in Journey Together to see if there's a spot in the meta for it. Let's have a look at the highest placing deck list for this archetype from Isaiah Chaville. It was back in Atlanta early on in this metagame, and it was a 12th place finish. I still feel like this is a great stock list to look at. No thrills really in here, no wasted space whatsoever, and just sort of gets the job done with what you're trying to achieve here. Also has that nice Budew in here, which wasn't always in a lot of the online data before we started to see the major tournaments come out. This means that you can have a good going second play as well, where you can buff up your Pollen to actually take some KOs with the Mochi stuff that we've seen before, which is also a nice deal to have in the deck. Going on to number 9, we have Zoroark. This is a bit of an inverse, really, of Archaludon because it's been picking up in popularity more recently, and we've finally started to see more of those results. Zoroark has picked up 134 points, and its conversion on average has been 16.15%. And here, it boasts that Gardevoir matchup, and that's one of the key selling points of Zoroark. This is way above 60%, actually. This is like a 80% matchup for Zoroark. It has that great type coverage when you're utilizing that Night Joker for either copying off Darmanitan or simply using a boss's orders, gusting up and attacking with an Ends Reshiram. So even if Gardevoir is able to play around the powerful rage attack from the Reshiram, it's still going to find a way to nail 2 prizes turn by turn in most cases. So that is your bread and butter best matchup as Zoroark. You're also pretty solid into the Gholdengo decks because of attacking with the Darmanitan itself with Backdraft, and also that option for Flame Body Cannon to set up KOs as well. And you're reasonable into the Dragapult variants as well, as you can see. Favourable into the Dusknoir build and even into the regular Dragapult. That's very appealing for Zoroark. So I think this is a great choice if you're thinking the metagame is going to continue to narrow as more of these tournaments come up. If you feel like there only really are 3 or 4 main contenders in the game, that being Gardevoir, Dragapult, and Gholdengo, this is a phenomenal pick for you. The one thing I do have to worry about is that matchup roulette with the end Zoroark. It doesn't seem like it can keep up with the high hit point, big basic approach of Raging Bolt, and also from the Pikachu Joltik box, where Pikachu's a strong attacker. It has the grass attacking suite in there. Oftentimes we're seeing the single prize Galvantula as well as Iron Leaves EX in the deck list, and it even has Iron Hands as well. So these approaches are really awkward for the end Zoroark deck. You have a big problem reaching on some of these lower hit point Pokemon, because the damage output from Zoroark naturally is just not that strong. Especially if you're not getting punched, you can't utilize that powerful rage attack. So that's the real hurdle right now for those Zoroark players. In addition, Flareon also has no problem getting around that and has high damage output at its disposal, and the Tera Box equally so, which means Zoroark is really good at capitalizing on some of the stage 2s in the metagame and the Gholdengo, but really suffers against the wider field right now. Taking a look at the highest placing Zoroark, we have Harvey's list from the Seville special event with the top 4 placement, bringing that really high research and Iono counts. I think it's worth noting that since then there has been sort of more nuanced supporter lists showing up with a small amount of Cypher Maniac that comes into the list, and I do think that's a big card actually, so that you can cherry pick Defiance Band Reversal. These are big combo pieces for some of your worst matchups, like the Raging Bolt, like the Tera Box, so that you can Counter Catcher, bring up, or even Prime Catcher, and bring up the Ogerpon, which means your Darmanitan's Flame Body Cannon goes from 90 to the 120 with Defiance, then you can KO via Weakness, and also take a single prize KO, ideally a Noctowl, or sorry, a Hoothoot, I should say, as you go, which is a big deal. But obviously this was one of the highest placing ones, and picked the right tournament for this deck, really, where the Gardevoir and the Dragapult were very popular, and if you consider that to continue, it's a great deck to keep going with. In at number 8, we have Flareon. This has picked up 175 points and has a decent conversion of 16.92%. Its biggest boast is the Gholdengo matchup, where Burning Charge can easily take KOs, and that means that you don't have to use Crispin as your supporter throughout the majority of the game. I think in some of these other games where it becomes more even or unfavourable, that's because you're tied to using Crispin throughout the game, rather than having those opportunities to boss and Iono as freely as you would like. But against Gholdengo, because Burning Charge is a good enough attack, you don't have to worry about Carnelian or powering up any of your other secondary attackers. The Flareon can have a real carry here. That opens up all those other supporter cards, and most importantly, it opens up the Briar supporter card as well. So Flareon can be very content taking a single prize KO, taking out one Gholdengo, and then the final Gholdengo KO will be the final 2 prizes you need to win the game, because you'll have Briar opened up for you, which is such a great deal. Again, that Zoroark is a nice pickup as a strong matchup as well, because I believe the Zoroark is upticking in popularity. It's continued to get some top 8 placements and whatnot, which means that's another boast for the Flareon deck. It's okay into the Raging Bolt deck. Again, it has that Briar at its disposal, so it can trade quite nicely in that regard. It's close and slightly unfavoured into Dragapult and Gardevoir, so that's the real challenge for the archetype. Those stage 2s are winnable, especially with type coverages and having the Angelite at your disposal. You have lines of play, but they're by no means the best matchups out there for you. And it also seems like the Joltik box is somewhat of a headache matchup as well. You don't naturally have many easy ways around the Pikachu, which means you need to either tech for it or find a means of gusting. And again, a lot of the time you want to use Crispin to have certainly these higher damage output attacks at your disposal. So that's a small challenge for Flareon going forward. Let's have a look at Ian Robb's 6th place list from Milwaukee. I think one thing to note about this archetype in particular is that oftentimes in Japan we're seeing the Wellspring Ogerpon coming into the deck list, but Ian went for a different approach, which was to use Burning Charge as your lead-out attack into the Budew-style decks, and just say that you're powering up enough Sylveon and whatever else in the back to present threats that can one-hit KO them, or again use that Angelite. Whereas a lot of the time, EV decks in Japan right now use the Wellspring Ogerpon to initiate that prize race more aggressively, try and punish before your opponent gets evolving, and almost play like a Tera Box into some of the stage 2s. So that's something that I'm still weighing up and wanting to test more myself. Is it that good that you're going to get immediately stamped against the Dragapults if you do use Wellspring? That would be the same thing that would happen if you used a Burning Charge, but you'd at least still have Flareon in front ready to attack again into another Budew or into another evolving Pokemon, and you would continue to thin the deck. Whereas a Wellspring, it takes more prizes early, but then from an unfair stamp or from an Iono to 4, if it's the Gardevoir's case, you have to find Jewel Seeker to keep up that pressure. I think if you do find that Noctowl, you basically win on the spot, But if you're unable to do that, then it might be better just to be the Flareon approach. So that's something I'm still weighing up between the deck lists. But Ian has brought a really, really strong 60. It wasn't just him placing with this list either. There was a few other Americans playing the exact same 60 and having a very strong showing. The one card that I'm not seeing a huge amount of value for is the Terapagos, but I do think it's good into other Noctowl decks that go Area 0. So it might be a big enough card to continue to keep in the deck list, but I have been debating a second EVEX, for example, just in the list, so that you have more ways to Burning Charge onto your EVs specifically, because these are the better attackers into the Dragapult and the Gardevoir. So that's a small thing that I'm debating right now, but this is a really good list from Ian. The other card I'm thinking about is Cyrano as a one-of. Haven't yet found the cut for it, but I do think that also might be worthwhile as an experiment in the list, just for a dual seek option that, as we know, grabbing your attacking EXs as well as things like Latias, like Pheasantipity, like Mew, especially Clefairy against Dragapult. These are all good things to pick out all in one go from a dual seeker, whereas a lot of the time you'll find yourself dual seeking for nest balls throughout the mid-game just so you can get those Fez and Mew developed for your mid-game strategy. That could be something this Cyrano can chip in with, so small debate there. I do really like this deck though. I think it is, again, going to be one that's ticking upwards in popularity if I had to take a guess, because it does have a nice pocket in the metagame of sort of countering the counters right now of the Zoroark and the Gholdengo. In number 7, we have Tanky Terapagos. This has 241 points accumulated and an average conversion of 13.75, so struggling a little bit. And straight away, looking at some of those unfavourables, I think that's a bit of a concern for this archetype. Straight Dragapult being awkward, straight Gholdengo being awkward, and the new Joltik Box being somewhat of a headache matchup as well. There are some tank Terapagos builds that can add in the Volcanion EX quite easily, so you can at least get around Pikachu a little bit better. But even then, your opponent might have just enough burst acceleration to initiate that 2-2-2 a little bit easier than a tanky Terapagos at times, just for how much they need to have dual seeking on turn 2 to take the Joltik out of the active spot and still KO some of these basics that accumulate a bunch of energy. It's not always easy to get that Volcanion so early, so the Joltik player can just stash enough energy on multiple Pikachu that they can sort of just crisp in their way through the remainder of the game. And also looks like the other builds of Dragapults are awkward, and Gardevoir as well. And then it's only even into the Flareon and the Zoroark. Its biggest boasts are being okay into the Tera Box, which was important at the beginning of the format, but is becoming less and less so of a boast. And it's also pretty reasonable into the Raging Bot as well, just for its difficulty to sort of reload all that damage output turn by turn, just by the size of these Terapagos. When you add in Bouffalont and Bravery into the mix, it's hard for them to continually reload as they're suffering KOs as well. Here's the highest placing list again from Atlanta. Like I said, this was a better metagame call from Keaton Gill, more towards the beginning of the format, where Tera Box was really worth beating, whereas I think it's much less so the case now. So I do think this might just be an archetype that is not really great on paper, but is good in the context of a metagame, and that metagame has kind of already shifted out. So I'd expect a little bit less of this tanky Terapagos archetype overall, even though inherently if you want to play the 60, it will run very smoothly and do what it wants to do quite capably. It's just its own strategy isn't all that strong into some of the best decks that we have in the metagame right now. In number 6, we do have that Tera Toolbox, Tera Box, 241 points accumulated, and it has that average conversion of 10.69. That's the big issue for Tera Box. It was touted to be this great archetype after seeing those Champions League results, and of course a few high-profile players piloting this to strong finishes, including Tord Reklev. So the metagame was very prepared for Tera Box as soon as it came about. And the data really isn't that great for this archetype, even with things like Tanky Terapagos being less of a deck in the mix. The fact that Joltik Box has emerged is a big problem for it. The Gholdengo is a tough matchup, as well as Dragapult and Gardevoir. So the selling points really are few and far between. I wouldn't expect much more from Tera Box, and I don't think the very best players will be bringing this archetype to tournaments these days, because the metagaming is just not that safe for the archetype. And this requires very intricate and delicate play with the deck, because it's a little bit fragile sometimes to those hand disruption that you really have to play out of your mind to get any sort of result with the deck. And the fact that the metagame isn't that favourable for it means that basically none of the best players will touch it, and then you're going to have subpar performance from people who can't play it perfectly either. When your biggest favourables are Raging Bolt and Flareon, and even then they're only mildly favoured, there's not much reason to be looking towards this archetype. The highest placing list was a top 4 from Seville, from Piotr. This was the exact same 60 Tord took to the Champions League for his top 16 placement in a 5,000 player tournament. So there is pedigree here, and we know it has the engine to still go far. It does have consistency in that opening fan call, getting your Tera down, getting turn 2 dual seeking and whatnot, that isn't much of the problem. It feels like the bigger issue right now is that after taking those initial prizes, you're going to get stamped and budged, and oftentimes this deck can't react to it perfectly, and that's a big issue. And also, if you don't have that really stellar turn 1 going first, sometimes even an Itchy Pollen can deny the turn 2 torrential pump, or at least force you to have some painful discards. You sit with 0 energy in play, and again, you're in that helter-skelter of, oh boy, I better hit Noctowl to do anything again next turn, otherwise I'm doing like a sob attack, and then it can all come crashing down. So yeah, this was a powerful archetype, and it feels like the metagame's already like sort of prepared for it, and isn't going to be shifting from this state. I feel like we just have so much Budgie, so much stamp from the Dragapult players specifically, whereas I think early on in the metagame there was a bit of a question mark of, was it better to be Crystal, was it better to be Stamp, that sort of thing. That much has pretty much changed at this point, and we know what A-Spec is mostly showing up in Pult, and that's the big issue for this archetype overall. In at number 5, we have the Joltik Box. This has really been picking up in popularity recently, and you can see why. It's picked up 286 points, and its conversion is mind-blowing, 25.58%. This is a real contender to the top archetypes, and the metagame is looking really good for it as well. It's even into Gardevoir, and even to unfavored into the Gholdengos and the Raging Bolts, but then the rest is looking great for you. You're very good at capitalizing on Terra Box. You basically yawn your way through Zoroark. And then the Dragapult matchups are also pretty reasonable for you. You have enough firepower into the Flareon, the Archaludon, even the tanky Terapagos as well. So it does feel like Joltik simply powering up the best of the best from the lightning stuff is a very powerful strategy right now. And I do think Joltik Box is still underplayed in the formats for how powerful it is. We do have this initial top 8 list from Tyler Matthews. There's also been subsequent top 4 placements as well. And this deck list is pretty straightforward in that you're maximizing counts of your supporter cards, including having those 3 poker gear, so you can just find the right one on the turn as you go. But you try and get that early jolting charge, revving up a bunch of energy. Usually you're ending with 5 or 6 energy in play after turn 1 if you use that Crispin. And from there you've got either Pikachu loaded up if you know you're facing other multi-prize matchups, or you're having an unchecked Amp You Very Much, and you're going to initiate with Iron Hands, hope that you can do it again with Gusting plays, and really just cruise your way to a crazy prize lead, and from there try and close out either with some high damage output from Miraidon or Pikachu, or even if it comes to it, Clefairy or Blood Moon Ursaluna as well. These can all chip in as great attacking threats. You thin the deck so quickly of energy that as you progress through the game, you get into this position where the Mew and the Fez draw, even if it's just 1 or 2 cards from the Mew, in like the worst case scenario, you're still having really good shots at getting your supporter cards or those poker gears, or even those ball search cards to, again, sort of like thin down, find another chance and something else like that. So I do think it is, again, a real threat in the metagame. One of the most consistent decks at forcing a 4-attack game plan whilst using your first attack, not taking prizes, but instead setting up your board, which is really annoying for these setup decks that really rely on you or your opponents to activate their counter catchers or activate the Iono. If you take that 1 turn off just to set up the board, it's much more challenging for these decks to power through. Let's go into the top 4 then. We have Raging Bolt with 368 points accumulated and an average conversion of 11.73, so not converting the best, and also its matchup data isn't super appealing. It does seem to be a little bit unfavored into both Gardevoir and straight Dragapult, which is somewhat of a concern. Also not ideal into Flareon, which is upticking. I think the Terra Box and the tanky Terapagos, you sort of take that as unlikely to hit more than one of them throughout the tournament. It also doesn't seem great into the Joltik Box. So the bigger boasts look to be the End Zoroark, which is picked up. It's okay into some of the Gholdengo. The data in this instance is quite strange in that you're happy to see the Dragapult build, but not the straight build. I think there's somewhat of just bias within the amount of games played here for the actual percentages there. I think overall it comes out more or less even. And then also the Dragapult-Dusknoir is a little bit more even than the straight Dragapult. But the deck is still consistent at what it's trying to do. It can also gain an edge just from winning in best of 3s by having more shots at it and being a consistent 7 out of 10 deck every game you play with the archetype, which is important. We also saw that really nice high-profile win from Christian Labella with the pretty straightforward list. I think the big innovation would be the Judge coming into the 60 here from Christian. Everything else is more or less straightforward with the list. We know that Baby Bolt is good at dealing with these stage 1s before they can get into stage 2s, most notably Drakloak. The Slitherwing is important for Pikachu right now in the metagame. and everything else is more or less straightforward of what you're trying to achieve. I don't think there are many dead spaces in the list at all. I still debate the second energy retrieval coming in, and I think there's somewhat of a hot debate around Squawkabilly's utility and also the fourth Ultra Ball within the deck. I think those are both debatable cards. You can also debate Blood Moon Ursaluna coming into the 60 as well. I know there's been some real stands of that, so that you have a late game boss's orders angle a lot easier, whereas the Raging Bolt sometimes has to remove so many energy with its bellows that it can't gust on that final turn, so your opponent can have a slightly easier time of forcing awkward prize race for you. So those are things to bear in mind there. But overall, Christian with a really solid list and a great performance as well, with plenty of footage now for you to check out if you want to see Bolt and how to sort of pilot those early turns. Going into, well, first of all, 3.5, because the straight Gholdengo is certainly less well-performing than the Dragapult, the Dragapult build of Gholdengo. So the Dengo-Pult seems to be the best build, but I did just want to look at the straight Dengo as well, because they are both seeing a decent amount of play, and whenever you combine the Gholdengo play percentages, it gets to around sort of like 12 to 15%, I think, over the last few tournaments. The conversion of the straight Dengo is quite poor. It's 13.27%. So I'm quickly going to brush over this and simply give you the long story short that the straight Gholdengo is substantially worse than the Dragapult version from all of our data. And we do still have a high placing list from Atlanta, a 9th place finish from Bodhi, making that asymmetrical top cut. And it was a really straightforward, streamlined list. You know, no backup engine whatsoever, just having Strike at Witch as a single prize, like, offset card, and really leaning into the high Cypher Maniac, high Arven count, and just saying that these are the best supporters possible. You have that TM Evo to get into immediately, a couple of Gholdengo, and that gets you to the races. But I'll spend much more time on the Dengo-Pult, which is converting at a much better rate, has accumulated more points, and its matchup data looks more appealing. So if you're playing Gholdengo, you've got to be playing the Dragapult variant. It has substantially better conversion at 18.45%, and its matchup data also looks much better, where you're good into the Dragapult-Dusknoir, good into Gardevoir, you're even into Terabox, Pikachu, and Archaludon, slight unfavored into straight Dragapults and the tanky Terapagos, and you have an awkward time against the Raging Bolt, the Zoroark, and the Flareon. Flareon being the real standout, and the Zoroark. Those two, it's obvious as to why those are the tough matchups. It's hard for you to play around Backdraft, and it's hard for you to play around Briar from a Flareon. The Raging Bolt, I think, in practice, could be a little bit closer as well. So things to bear in mind there. But overall, a lot more strong placements from the backup of Recon Directive within these deck lists. And here we have Caleb's 4th place list from Monterey, where it incorporates a 2-2-1 line. You don't always have to attack with the Dragapult. You do, of course, play the energy to be able to do so. So whenever you require that Phantom Dive, you can cash in with the Munkidori as well, so you can actually pressurize a lot of bench Pokemon with that combination. In those situations where you feel like Make It Rain isn't getting the job done, you have that more tactical approach. But in every matchup, you at least have Recon Directive in addition to Coin Bonus, just to see more cards generally and filter things through nicely. Still utilizing that high Cypher Maniac plus the Arven Evo package. Has the Vengeful Punch in here to try and help out against the Pikachus that little bit. Also has that Ace Nullified Genesect, which is a cool tech card that's showing up in all sorts of deck lists right now. Shutting down ace specs from opponents can be a really big deal. Obviously good into like Dengo Mirror. It's good into, provided you can find it early enough. And it can also be good against Stamp. It can be good against all sorts of things to try and prep that just so that you're in a good position. Denying Prime Catcher late on from a Raging Bolt as well can sometimes be really beneficial when you finally start putting your multi-prizes into play. So Genesect's just a strong card right now in the meta, to be honest with you. And again, no real wasted space, high counts of all the important item cards, and then you just sort of fill out the curve with the rest of the one-offs because Arven can cherry-pick them for the right occasion. Let's get into our number 2 then. We have Gardevoir with 502 points earned and an average conversion of 17.86%. Again, very respectable for a fairly popular archetype out there. Its biggest challenges are the Zoroark matchup and the Gholdengos out there. We know that both builds of Gholdengo will try and utilize their own Munkidori to sort of offset some of your monkey damage, and these Gholdengos are oftentimes playing that jamming tower as well, which can be a headache for the Gardevoir, so something to bear in mind. It has a bunch of even matchups. It's okay into all of these aggressive decks, the Raging Bolt, the Terabox, the Joltik Box, the Flareon, and even the tanky Terapagos. And the big boast of Gardevoir, it's best, one of the best decks at least, into that Dragapult matchup, which is absolutely huge. Sure, you get a free Archaludon as well, but most of the time, the big reason to be playing Gardevoir is that you are favoured into the 2 Dragapults, and we haven't talked about Dragapult yet, so that tells you where Dragapult's going to shape up in our top 10 today, and that's still the bread and butter for Gardevoir. We do have the same first place list that Brent first brought to us from Monterey. It also got first place in Seville, and it's continued to have great results even further still. So both Brent and Yuan having wins with this archetype within 4 tournaments is absolutely absurd that it's taken down the exact same 62 victories. So this is by far and away the blueprint that you have to take on, and just accept that this is a really good high stock, and this is a great way to accumulate victories in the Pokemon TCG, capitalize on Dragapult, which still has a lot of reason to be played in the format and is likely to continue to be the most played deck in the room. And Gardevoir is just rubbing its hands at that opportunity and can find ways with the Monkey Dories and the Screamtails and Drifloon into all sorts of matchups to sort of see its way through. Of course, Gardevoir a strong attacker as well in a lot of those instances. And again, I feel like Brent still just made such a strong claim for an amazing list. It's strange to see no Buddy Buddy Poffin. It's strange to see no Mew EX in the list, but the way this list flows is still just very, very strong. And again, you can't really see many easy cuts in the list anyway. Like maybe one Night Stretcher is a flexi card, but I think that's like the biggest flex of anything. And everything else seems like really, really important to play the maximum counts of, to be honest with you. Maybe you could debate research going down from 4 to have other supporter cards that can draw just for a secret box option. But at the same time, just seeing the most amount of cards is hard to argue with. In at number 1.5 then, we have Dragapult-Dusknoir. Simply the Dragadusk build has accumulated 542 points, which does put it as like the second best deck behind the straight Dragapult. So even splitting them up, Dragadusk has still been good, but its conversion is atrocious at 12.28%, and its matchup data is also atrocious. So I'm ringing the alarm bell right now of this is on fraud alert, because Dragadusk is, like I was saying with straight Gholdengo, the lesser of the 2 builds you can be playing right now. It looks to me, from all the matchup data that we've seen over the last 4 regionals and the conversion data, that Dragapult-Dusknoir is not the way to play it. It, of course, did get that high-profile second place finish in Atlanta, but for the most part, we've seen much more success from a straight Dragapult. So it feels like this Dusknoir does just take up too much space. It's not great in the Dragapult mirror match for the most part in a lot of those situations, because you're both itching each other. So even though there's that option to Curse Blast and sort of take advantage of certain cards, you can't countercatcher and force multiple KOs on the Draclux like you used to be able to as easily. So it feels like they have to get a Dusknoir out in time, and that just doesn't always happen against the straight Dragapult. They're very good at knocking out the Duskulls and even the Clops now with the Monkey Dory stuff. So it does feel like it's best being a straight build, unless you're going to do something similar that we saw from Yulio to a top 4 place, which was also incorporates Luminous Energy Monkey Dory into a Dusknoir build, so you're not losing out in that Dragapult mirror. I think it's too difficult to ask an archetype to have a bad time into Straight Pult and into Gardevoir, and that's unfortunately what the Dragapult-Dusknoir does do right now. So skipping past that and actually looking at the best deck, we have the Straight Dragapult. This is quite surprising as well. 612 points earned, so it's the best performing individual deck, but its conversion is crazy. This is the highest conversion that we've seen, and it's one of the more popular decks in the room as well. So Straight Pult is just a crazy deck in the game. 27.52% conversion, and it's just having a really fantastic time, to be honest with you. Its only major downside is the Gardevoir matchup. It's also suffering a little bit at the Zoroark and Joltik Box uptick, but it's very solid into all sorts of these other archetypes. It's okay into both Gholdengo builds. It's fine into Raging Bolt. It's fine into the Tera Box and the Flareon. It has answers to a lot of these archetypes. So the placement of this deck isn't the best, but its stats are still just so incredible in that it can wiggle its way out of all sorts of awkward positions. Makani coming in here with a great second place finish from Milwaukee. And we have the important basic tech cards of Monkey Dory, Hawlucha, and the Ace Nullifier Genesect, which also means we have a slightly elevated count of those tools, with the EXP, Luxcape, Bravery Charm, and the Rescue Board. And essentially, by cutting the spaces of a Dusknoir, you just have more space for consistency supporters. You get to bolster those counts out a little bit more, give yourself higher odds of getting that turn 2 Pollen, or sorry, turn 1 Pollen going seconds, and having your next one lined up, and making sure that you're building towards as many recons as possible, filling your bench with these to the maximum extent, and just having supporting basics in there as well, knowing that you really are very much a stamp deck, trying to turn to stamp anyone that can deal with a Budgie and want to brute force their way through the prize race. You can punish on the spot and those Luminous also help out as you recon through the game so that you can find either of your basic energy, and that can then fulfill the Phantom Dive whilst also helping you with the Monkey Dory as well. In terms of spaces within Makani's list, I think the 3 Night Stretcher is slightly high, and that's the count that I'm juggling the most. And there's also a debate around whether or not some Jacques should be in here, whether Turo could potentially be in the deck list. Those are a few things that I'm debating. Failing that, it could just be an extra Artisan or an extra Nest Ball. Those are easy choices to add into the deck as well, which are fairly routine counts. But overall, the straight Dragapult is far and away better, actually, than the Dragapult-Dusknoir. If you look into the data, it's a no-brainer which build is best. We are quickly going to touch before we go on to the overall overview of the decks that are sort of peering in just outside that top 10. I think of this list, the Frostlass Monkey Dory has a lot of potential, very good at punishing the evolving archetypes, again, has a really solid time into the Dragapult decks. The Blissey Monkey Dory, similarly, is an archetype that can punish some of these evolving decks. It does have an awkward Gardevoir, the Blissey, so that's a small thing to bear in mind, but against the rest of the field, it's actually in a pretty solid place. It's also the Raging Bolt that's a small concern. The Roaring Moon as well, similar to the Archaludon Poison deck, takes advantage of that engine and can set you off on a nice path and has a good time, denying those Phesantipities. You could also debate the sort of Ancient Box as well, a more single prize focused deck that has had a few high profile placements that uses that Dunsparce engine in the back and takes advantage of the neutralization zone as well, which can certainly catch people by surprise. Those are the main ones that I think on this graphic have good metagame reasons to be played. I think the Charizard, if you really enjoy the deck, is fine for Alligator as well. We've seen, again, it can have those spikes, and it's started to have a few Day 2s coming in here. And the Hop Zacian, I still feel, is not quite cooked right, but still has had some decent Day 2 runs as well. Just to end on the sort of overview then of that conversion rates all in one graphic, as well as the average meta share in one graphic. The Dragapult, Joltik Box, and Gholdengo-Pult are the best converting decks that you've seen over the last 4 tournaments, and they're not necessarily the most played decks either. You can see the Gholdengo-Pult way down here in play rates. The Dragapult-Dusknoir being played far more than the straight Dragapult shows the nuance here. Almost double the amounts on average of Dusknoir builds, and they are just, working atrociously. Some of the lowest of our top 10 here that we're looking at, and also the Joltik Box has only recently been picking up in play rate, and I expect this to be jumping a few places, actually, getting easily over that 5% of play going into our next few tournaments, and definitely has good reason for it, because the conversion, certainly of Pult and Joltik Box, are just absurd. And then when you look down at some of this other stuff, Gardevoir, Flareon, and Zoroark, Dengo-Pult, these are our sort of next best decks in the game, where they may have real big selling points to them, but they also have some high-profile awkward matchups in the mix as well, for the most part. Gardevoir obviously making a bit more of a claim to be that stronger deck, because it's won 2 of the events of the 4, but it does still have some awkward matchups in the mix that you can't really ignore, to be honest with you. It's interesting that the Raging Bolt's our most recent winner, but has such a terrible conversion, and is also very, very highly played. So it's a strange situation where we have to respect it and know that your Raging Bolt matchup is reasonable, even though its conversion on average is not that great. I would imagine it continues to be popular because there was a win just reinforcing it as an archetype generally. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Make sure you check out labs.limitless.tcg. That's where I've got a lot of my data today. It made this video a lot quicker for me to make as well, because previously I'd have to do a lot of the tinkering on the Trainer Hill metagame sharing. That's all from online data. Hopefully the data from a number of major tournaments gives you more reliable percentages here. But again, just bear in mind, pinch of salt always. It's a small number of games played in some of these instances. Check out the Trainer Hill tool as well. And as always, do your own testing and see how matchups play out for you. And think about tech cards as well. Hope you enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you tomorrow for another one. Cheers.